Okay, do you want to present us? Yes, I will, but you can come here and we can get together all the time. Because as we said, we have interactive way of presentation. Okay, good morning. I see some new faces, but most of them are locomotion people, newcomers. Welcome. For those, for the other ones, please bear with us with one more day, because today Natalie and myself are going to present the concepts which are a kind of umbrella of all individual lines we are dealing under locomotion projects, and all of them integrated in storylines, scenarios, policies, and measures, which are the main subject of being modeling with under a locomotion project. So we start with discussion and presentation of the storylines and scenarios. We will go with a little exercise where we're gonna try to map our brains regarding the different way of how the future might evolve. After that, we will have a kind of a concluding presentation, which will sum up of our common understanding of the storylines and scenarios. And then in the second part, Natalie will present you the policies and overall goals which were associated with different scenarios and which we plan to model in William. And then again, we will conclude with an exercise dealing with, and we'll try to understand and to talk about the possible synergies and trade-offs between different policies. So, no need of introduction. Natalie has just arrived yesterday. and then maybe, but later on during the discussion, we will meet the students attending the locomotion, the other people, they know each other. So, we start from the definition. What we understand under the term storyline? It is simply a consistent story, or some call it narrative, on how the future might evolve. Just simple story and a simple story, and it means that it could be there might be as many stories as there are people in different understanding of that. We, in order to have a kind of a uniform approach to this, we have a kind of a very specific implementation of a storyline, which we call a scenario, and which we implement in the model using some quantitative inputs in order to explain these scenarios. So here, in order to grasp the definitions, we have presented the example of green growth storyline. So we start with each storyline must have an overall goal. And for example, the overall goal which leads the story behind the green growth scenario is to achieve absolute decoupling of greenhouse gases emissions and the GDP growth. Then this overall goal, going down into the pyramid, should be reflected in policy objectives, which will be imposed in the society. And those policy objectives, in order to achieve this overall goal of absolute decoupling, for example, would be decarbonization of various sectors of the economy. So, as you see, we have one overall goal, but as we go down in the pyramid, we must have more and more elements in order to achieve the overall goal. Then, going down into the pyramid, we have to impose some policy targets in order to achieve the policy objectives. And for example, for this specific decarbonization policy objectives, we could have, for example, target of 32% of renewable energy share in the total energy by 2030. So many of policies, this is an example, but there are much more targets which will help contribute to achieving the policy objectives. And then in the last layer of the pyramid, we have the policy measures, which are instruments or actions or projects or activities what have to be undertaken by different stakeholders in the society in order to fulfill the policy target. And those are called policy measures. For example, for introduction of renewable and for increase the share of renewables, we have to introduce like a number of measures like feed-in tariffs, carbon tax, premiums, and so on. So this is a kind of a structure how one storyline is implemented in the society, starting from the overall goals to the lowest level of the pyramid, and that is policy measures. So, as I said, all these scenarios are not meant to predict the futures, but we put some qualitative inputs of the storylines, and then with these qualitative inputs and quantitative inputs, we run the scenarios and implement that storyline into the model. And then after that, we see what would be the consequences along various parameters, how this implementation of this specific scenario will be reflected in the society. Okay, there are two types of storylines. The first one is so-called baseline storyline, which means that we assume that all trends in the society along various dimensions will go on in the way as they were conducted in the past. Then, why we need this? We need these scenarios to be implemented in order to have a kind of a reference line later on to compare the achievements of the scenarios which we call policy action scenarios. And what is policy action scenarios? Those are scenarios where we, on top on the baseline, include additional policies and measures which will help us to achieve additional policy goals, like, for example, decarbonization. So, policy action scenarios introduce different policies which will help us to achieve additional policy goals. So the question is how we simulate scenarios in William. First of all, as I said, there are many different storylines, but we did a thorough literature review and find some significantly different but inherently coherent storylines on how the future might evolve, and they're independent of our individual preferences. Of course, they are limited number because we have to make trade-offs between the comprehensiveness and workability of scenario architectures, because it is very difficult to analyze if you have so many different storylines. And then we want to apply this what-if approach, meaning we want to test the assumptions. So the goal is not to decide of likeliness of what is the likeliness of some storylines that specific storyline will happen in the future, but to evaluate or to understand what will happen if that particular storyline is implemented. And then we make this comparative analysis between different trajectories against versus the baseline. Okay, through now what I've explained so far, we will present here with schematically. So baseline scenario, we have continuation of current trends, and in these scenarios, in each of the scenarios, we have integrated policies and measures. They are inherently included in these scenarios. We have to include in the model those one, and also include some hypotheses, formulate some hypotheses which will test later on. And also, as an input, we have to include the overall goals which drive the storyline, and also expanded overall goals which are connected to the specific scenario which we want to implement. And then we run the model and we see what results we're gonna get. So the question is, are the overall goals fulfilled? We have some indicators which measure the fulfillment of overall goals. And if they are okay, we continue further with writing policy recommendations. But if not, it seems that we need to design another scenario which will include additional policy measures, which will help to, we need additional policies and policy measures which will help the overall goals to be achieved. So the policies which inherently are included into the baseline scenarios are not enough to fulfill the overall goals driving the scenario. So we have to come to the next step, and that is policy action storyline. Again, now we include the policies or subset of policies which are relevant for that policy action storyline, and also hypotheses which are formulated hypotheses which should in a way be equal for baseline and all policy scenarios we are modeling. And then again, as an input, we want to know, to give an input to the model, what are the overall goals driving the storyline, and what are the expanded overall goals which are related to concrete scenarios we are trying to implement, and then we run the model with that concrete scenario. Again, we see whether the overall goals are fulfilled. Yes, it means that we were successful and we can go on with deriving policy recommendations. But if not, we have to add additional policies consistent with the storylines and try again, run the scenario and see again whether the overall goals are fulfilled. And this is this kind of iterative process when we adapt the scenario, including with the time new policy targets, in order at the end to finish with finalization of fulfillment of overall goals. Also, in some point of this process, we could also think of revision, a redefinition of overall goals, because at some point we might understand that these overall goals might not be achievable. So again, we can reconsider the overall goals and even change the overall, adapt the overall goals in order to have at the end overall goals fulfilled with the set of policies, actions which are included as an input. So this is the way how it works. And it is repetitive, iterative process, which at the end will help us to get a scenario which we, in a way, will be successful. We can conclude that yes, we have this scenario implemented in the model, and now we can derive policy recommendations. The overall goals we given at the beginning as an input are fulfilled. We have concrete set of policy measures which helped us to fulfill the overall goals. So now it's time to write specific policy recommendations for this. Yes,
with Natasha, can I maybe give an example? Maybe it's clearer with an example, especially I think the term overall goals may be a bit confusing because it's maybe a term which we use specifically in this, in our context. So I will stand up. An overall goal is also a policy goal. It's a policy goal, but it's a very wide one on a wider societal goal. For example, Natasha, she gave the example of the green growth scenario. So if you pursue, if you want your region or the globe to follow a green growth path, your ultimate goal is that there is an absolute decoupling between economic growth and greenhouse gases. This is what you want to achieve with green growth. That's why it's called green growth. So this is it's a policy objective, a very broad one, but it's inherent in the storyline. It follows from the storyline. But there are many other potential policy objectives which you could or should maybe even try to pursue. For example, life expectancy. I mean, let's assume you have a very nice scenario which gives you excellent results regarding climate change and you stay below the 1.5%. But life expectancy, your model gives you an output which shows you that life expectancy is going to drop by 10 years or something like that. I mean, is this a desirable future? That's why we add additional so-called, we call them overall goals, but you may also just call them policy objectives. And there are potentially many of them. I mean, our goals as society are not just to avoid dangerous climate change. I mean, we also pursue other goals. We want to have, we want to stay healthy. We want to have a fairly egalitarian society. We have pursue many, politicians usually pursue many and sometimes very contradictory objectives. So that's the overall goals, and the overall goals are sort of a benchmark. So you run the model, you do the simulation, and then you first look at the overall goals to see, okay, is this scenario giving you a desirable result? And if not, you go back to the policies and you see, okay, we have to adjust. We need to be more stringent on, I don't know, on greenhouse gas emissions, or we need to be add some other redistributive policies to make sure that the social inequalities do not widen any further. So this is just a bit mystery about the overall goal.
Let me give some comment about that. This is a quite relevant issue in the, let's say, design of the model, because most of the models usually are the main driver of many models are just the GDP. So just to look how the GDP grows and the GDP is higher, and so this is the main driver usually. So, but we understand that we should look at other indicators, working indicators, and these working indicators, or overall goals like quality or whatever, should be also the drive of the policies and the drive of the system. And this is the original reason to include these expanded overall goals like something quite relevant in the model. And it's not easy to include, because usually economy is the drive of the model in most of the cases, not the models, not only the one.
Yeah.
Sorry, Laura, you have a question?
Yes.
Well, I was thinking that, well, it is included, but in the end, one possible result is that the goals are not achieved by policies, right? So, like, there's a moment where you stop making like the iteration,
but then you have to conclude that your scenario, your narrative, is not feasible. Yeah. If you say, okay, green growth, whatever we do not achieve, we might achieve to stay below or we do not even achieve the 1.5, the containment of climate, of the temperature rise to 1.5 for pre-industrial times. If you do not achieve this in your model, then either the model is wrong or it's simply not a feasible storyline. That's absolutely perfectly valid result. But
So
it's the
you
same
go
with
to redefine the overall goals, right?
No, you just conclude that this is, we believe our results tell us that green growth is not feasible, which is where if we concluded this, we wouldn't be the only authors in the world to say that.
No, but I find it like maybe this part of the work is not really reflected in the final papers, so you don't really show how many you have done, or you don't include.
I don't know which final papers you were referring to.
I don't know, when there's a paper about the model with some scenarios, you only see like 3 or 4 scenarios. And then to give this conclusion of we have found that this scenario is not feasible, like it's not achieving the final goals. We are not showing the whole process of we have done these iterations and we have tried to add some other policy measures.
Well, you should. I mean, I think you should. I mean, maybe not every iteration, but at least the ones where you say, okay, now I'm switching this on, I'm switching this off. I mean, you should also, of course, in a paper tell, especially the hypothesis. I mean, Natasha has been talking about hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? For example, you know, there are many estimations about what reserves do we have, what are the copper reserves we have, or what are the, I don't know, about oil reserves. I mean, there are also, there's a huge variety also in those estimations. So of course, when you publish, you need to make this transparent. You need to say, okay, we have taken the numbers from this or that paper or from that or that database, which is also, of course, subject to a lot of uncertainty, depending on the assumptions you make. I mean, in the model, you can change everything. You can say, okay, no, I believe that the reserves are twice as big. And then maybe you get the result you want. Yeah, but it's not just pressing one button, but it's, I think what we're trying to say is the model as such does not produce any results. It's always dependent on the scenario, on the hypothesis. I mean, every model will need some exogenous input where you would, I mean, no model is able, I don't think so, to fully model the whole world, everything. So you need exogenous input, and the exogenous input is, of course, always, which do you choose, which source do you believe, which hypothesis do you make, and no one knows the future, so you make assumptions, and you have to make them, transparent. You have to explain them, and others will come and say, yes, but I made another assumption and I got this result, and that's where the academic debate starts, I guess. Yeah.
So can you actually do also the opposite side, like I'm looking for a strategy that is in place now and try to model with you, try to put it in your model and see what the results are, for example?
Yeah, that's the idea behind the baseline. Yeah. I mean, the baseline is also often called as business as usual. So the idea is that you don't go beyond what's already planned and implemented. But of course, having said that, I mean, William is we had also internally many discussions about that because policy is always changing. Yes. I mean, who knows tomorrow in a year what the European Commission will decide? We don't. We just know basically what's right now on the table. But of course, we didn't go through the pains of researching for every country in the world. What do they say? What kind of plans do they have for greenhouse gas emissions for 2050? Or greenhouse gas emissions maybe not such a good example because there are international treaties. But let's say, what are they planning in terms of renewables for the next 50 years? Yeah, of course that would be a very proper approach, but I mean, knowing that the political world is changing so much, and then there is a war in Ukraine, and all of a sudden, nuclears are again rehabilitated, and coal is great. I mean, the model, of course, cannot predict such short-term events. I mean, a model is not designed to predict those disruptive events. Model is good at predicting certain behavior when you have a certain continuation. And usually what you do in the models is you take a time series and you extrapolate and say, okay, this is how it's been developing over the past 50 years. And for the baseline, we simply assume that it's going to follow the same trajectory, be it linear or exponential or whatever nice function you have.
I think you asked about, let's say, for example, European strategy, something like that, how to implement this European strategy of green growth, something like that. You asked about this kind of scenario.
It was more about what if you model the European Green Deal and you find out that the results that the Commission published are not exactly the same.
Yeah,
This is
great
what-
result.
Yeah.
You get a lot of publicity.
Yes, this is what we can do, obviously.
And what would you do?
For example, we have tried to do something similar in the case of Spain. We have another, let's say, different model. We call models law, and in the previous version of models law, we try to implement the I don't know what is the English name, but it's more or less the National Plan for Climate Change and Energy Transition and so on. The NIEC, maybe. So we see that it's not possible to implement. There are some contradictions in the results, for example. So when we try to implement any, let's say, European strategy, we will see what happens, but we will be able to say, okay, that's right, that's not, or maybe we consider that it's not possible, or we consider that it's possible, or what hypothesis we will need to consider to be possible, to be feasible. Yes, we will be able to do. This is one of the maybe more interesting issues we can try with the model, just to check how feasible are some, let's say, plans, energy plans or climatic plans. This is one of the most promising results we hope to obtain, but at the moment, you know that we are still going work.
And this is an excellent introduction to the next slide. As you see here, here are the baseline and policy scenarios which were selected, storylines, as to be modeled under locomotion. And you see on the policy storylines, we are not only focusing on green growth, but extended. As you see, when we want to present some examples, we always, it's an easier way to do something with renewables, with greenhouse gases emissions, because it's more easy, because it is quantifiable, parameters are quantifiable, and it's easy to explain. But then again, it comes to social and economic side of the problems, which are not very much very easy to model. And that's why we need to extend our modeling capacity and with inclusion of these dimensions. So we don't stick only to green growth as a narrative, but also would try to model as a storylines also Green Deal and post-growth, where these kind of dimensions are in a way better addressed and more I would say, more explored. Later on, I will show what is the focus of each of the scenarios. So, as a baseline in locomotion, also what you consider as a baseline, again, it's very, I would say, subjective and also very changeable method. You have to map the current trends in the future. It's very difficult because in the near future you have some disruptive elements, so all your story for the future can be destroyed and practically the baseline scenario is not valid. So in a way, you have to revisit your baseline scenario very often and probably change it as the new developments are going on. But at some point, you have to stop and to make agreement what you consider as a baseline. And in our case, for locomotion, we decided to go with SSP2, middle of the road scenario, which is part of SSP framework of IPCC, which was applied in fifth assessment report and 1.5 degree scenarios. So our baseline scenario in the locomotion will be SSP2. Middle of the roadway of the road scenario, and we also test against that not only green growth but Green Deal and post-growth storylines and all the relevant policies and measures and objectives which are somehow associated with these three different storylines. And
Natasha,
yes.
sorry, can I just say something? For those who are familiar with the shared socioeconomic pathways, I just wanted to say that we're not really, we take them more as an inspiration because they define a lot of things exogenously, like for example, economic growth, which in our model is endogenous. So economic growth is a result and not an input. So really the SSPs, it's a bit like, it's more for inspiration.
No, SSP is really baseline only.
But more for inspiration because a lot of the dimensions that are defined in the SSPs are endogenous in our model, so not so applicable for us. Yeah.
I was gonna ask this because I recently started to know about these shifts, socio-economic conflicts, and I don't like. They are like used broadly, and I don't know if there's some like critical, I don't know, papers or people talking about the fact that they are defining everything. So it is like it kind of makes generating models that will provide those results a bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. If
I can, for example, tell you an anecdote. I hope it's true because I just heard it, so I hope it's true. But for example, take the very important dimension of population growth. In our model, we can manipulate population growth. We can play with different things. But in the SSPs, for political reasons, population growth is do not touch. Because it's not considered ethical to tangle with population growth. It's something that people procreate and you don't mess with it, basically. That's a bit the UN perspective also. I mean, also because Western countries have the tendency to tell the poor global South, you need to procreate less, and the global South tells the global North, no, you need to consume less. And so to avoid a little bit this debate of blaming it on population growth, it's too politically sensitive to put it in this kind of framework. But we still think it's very interesting and it's very important. So that could be one criticism of the SSPs, because SSPs are also political. I mean, IPCC is political. It's not.
But they are like used.
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't find any critics to it.
I think the method with which they were developed was very solid, very participatory and everything.
So it's quite easy just to take a reference for everybody, a common reference. So it has been commonly used for everybody, but obviously there are some criticisms. I don't know specific papers about that, but for example, let's say in some fora you can find some criticisms about for example, the cost growth of the growth is not considered, or even something easier. After the pandemic, the things are different. So the numbers have changed a lot. So how we can include this pandemic impact in the SSP? So obviously, it has effects, but many people start from them, just.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, you have mentioned that SSP model is political. So my question would be more, do you think that polygamy is political? And if so,
Maybe.
Yes, sure, of
and if
course.
so, which narrative would you, which political narrative would you say that you define under?
Well, this is a very interesting question. Obviously, nobody is neutral. Everything is a model, everything you do something. You have, let's say, a political bias, always. But in the case of William, the only say I can tell you is that we have tried to be as more neutral as we can, but it's not totally, of course. And also in the consortium, there are different, let's say, positions, and we have tried to reach a consensus between all the, let's say, political views we have tried. So William is not just a political specific view, but a mix of many people that want to do the things as better as they can. And the good thing is that as it is going to be open source, everybody will be able to change and to say, okay, I don't like this. I'm going to change with maybe another function, another mode, because it's like a puzzle. So you can change one piece and put another if you don't like it, or you can modify functions. This is the only say that I can say in order to avoid this kind of a political view. But obviously, everything we do is political in a certain way.
And there's a bit of stakeholder involvement as well.
Yeah, and also the stakeholder involvement, they also decide. Yes, some of the issues we have are due to the, let's say, assessment of the stakeholders. I remember this one, the one said that it was very important, the education, so we include education function in the
Yeah.
in William. This is an example, but also about a company. Somebody said that it's very important, the private review.
Yeah, or we had one focus group where there was a stakeholder from, I think it was Bangladesh,
Yeah.
and he said, I mean, rightly he said, okay, yeah, but these are narratives which are Western narratives, and in Bangladesh nobody is talking about Green Deal, green growth, post growth. What are you talking about? So, but Natasha will just explain a little later, and we'll try to do justice to this criticism because William is multi-regional. I'm sure they have explained this to you in the first days. So we have actually the option to implement different scenarios for different world regions. So we don't have to run one global scenario where we are all on a post-growth trajectory, or we are all on a green growth trajectory, but we can actually say, okay, in the global south, we are following business as usual, and in the global north, we are doing something different. What would happen? Would it be enough? What would be the consequences? So we, of course, we are trying to play with this, but it's absolutely valid.
That's why we believe more political, right? There's more chapter worms.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, we'll have another focus group. Maybe you want to participate. I think it will be. Is it a focus group? No, it's a focus group, so it's not open. But where we will try to discuss this with policymakers. So, kind of what combinations of scenarios would they find interesting? For which world region, what kind of scenarios? Because we can play with the time frame. So, when do we implement it? You can play with the intensities, you can play with all the parameters.
And timing.
Timing, yeah.
When some transformation to policy scenario will happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I have another question.
Yes.
We like
I'm
questions.
really interested in this part of the political model and whatever, because I think that, yeah, everything is political at some point, but I'm interested in leading a research project funded by the European Union. If there are some measures that you take place in the project to enhance the neutrality as much as you can. It can be like open debates, it can be in stakeholder forum, I understand, it can be like different, but it can be also have a different, large range of the scenarios that can have like a lot of political spectrum. But I want to know exactly if you have thought about that, if you have concrete actions to avoid political influence, if you stay neutral.
I think we have tried to include all the views in the debate in order to build the model. But we have not tried, let's say, to be not neutral by itself, but just to consider all the options we can consider, all the views. For example, in the economic model, we had a strong debate. Well, finally, there is one view. There is another that is in the background. Well, it's quite difficult to represent because in order to give this kind of, let's say, political view, you have two ways. Just the structure of the model. This is something that is a little bit difficult to change. The other is just the data, the parameters. This is very difficult. This is very easy to change. So, as I said before, this is open for parameters. You can change everything. But it's a little bit more difficult is to change the structure. But well, the instruments we have is that we have already told the stakeholders, forums, but also the debate in each, for example, in each module, there are people from different partners. So there has been a debate. Many of the debates has been, for example, about this CCS, about hydrogen, about in energy models. Another debate is about economic model, if we include price, how to, or not, if how include the prices, how it's going to be the market, it's not a clear model of yes or no. So there has been a lot of debates inside of the consortium, and we have tried to consider all points of view, and also, of course, the stakeholders' point of view. This is what we have done. I don't know if we were able to do anything more or not, but that's all. and maybe the more important way is that this tool is that it's going to be an open source tool. So anybody can check and change what you want.
I think we can pass now to the group work. We want to map our minds regarding the essential ingredients of the storylines, and we're gonna divide in 4 groups, right?
No, but I just counted. I think 3 groups are also fine.
3 groups are fine. How?
So the idea is that we have papers, we have pens, that you that you work a bit for yourself, and that you think what does green growth mean for us in our group? How do we understand it? What are essential dimensions? And here we have listed quite a lot of them, so you can think of all of them, you can think of others. For example, if you say, okay, if we want to pursue a green growth scenario, we need more innovation. For example, we need to speed up technological development, we need to make CCS work, etc. So you develop your own storyline by means of a mind map. Have you ever done mind maps? So there's a central concept, and you do whatever you want, and you have only 15 minutes, so it's short. I would like you to count to 3, and these are the groups. Find yourself a spot somewhere. Here's the paper.
You'll be paper for each of the 3 policies.
So can you start with 1?
Yeah.
1?
1.
2? 3? Yeah, wherever.
Or
No. One again.
1.
Okay.
2.
Okay.
3.
1. 2.
3. 1.
So please don't forget your number. It's important. Do you all have a number? So the group 1 finds a corner, group 2 finds a corner, and group 3 finds a corner.
But group 1 is green growth, right?
Yeah. Group 1 is post growth, group 2 is green growth, and group 3 is green deal.
Okay.
Yes?
Green Deal meaning Green New Deal as in the socialist version, or the European Green Deal?
That's a very good question. And a very tough one. You decide. You decide.
Group 1, 2, 3.
And we would like you also to present 5 minutes each group. So really keep it very short. It's fast.
Group 1. Okay. Group 2. Where is group 2? Okay. Group 1 and group 3. Group 2, group 3. Here is
Do we have an artist in the group?
You're open and okay.
Sí, bueno, luego, sí, porque la presentación de Robert, a ver, aquí está dos cosas. Aquí tengo que tener claro. Vale, pensaba que tú tenías. Vale. Which one?
Oh, you have to control this. Not all. The ones you think are most important.
So this is that we can get this concept, and this is very fast. I can actually environment. Than the amount of goods and services that are
Let's see what they're looking to today. Just choose. Maybe this group.
So basically, the is to look for very large measurements to measure the level instead of just
So does anyone know what
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Don't rush. There's enough time. It's always not set past. 1 hour for the evaluations to
most
because we can send it
how we want to measure.
That's my presentation, it's very short.
Another
No,
part
you don't
would be
do
how
it, but then you have to yeah, but
I think with actually the correct point economic development, I would write that down and say like there's
economic development is like.
although we should be inside
But yeah, they are very active, which is good.
maybe let's say something like say economic social development instead of like the social development
Regarding I got it
it's about teach a lot of innovation, what in the future. Overall, I can proceed. I will give you don't need to is to reduce the energy consumption and the material consumption. I mean, you need, in order that go back in a balance with
now we're talking
degrowth can be in this into part of
yeah, it is like a sandwich, there are saying there are people for this is lower. I didn't understand what I was saying was meant to say.
yeah, it's like if really to handle it, that will have. But for the purpose of simplicity, we set up as global same.
But maybe this one said like for some like the
Really, it's all economic development.
yeah, we can do.
So how will economic development?
Yeah. So we can say something like
different investment in the key critical technologies, the production of the different.
I don't know if that's
Yeah, that is absolutely critical.
yeah,
Because we need.
Yeah.
You can't do anything without that. You
No, no,
need
you're
to generate more renewable energy, develop technologies.
I think that's something I would say like
Research and development, investment into research and development, like
can I call it industrial policy, but everyone is in favor of R&D, but some of you are in favor of state activity and
apply and then the state is doing it, that is like poor stuff, but if you manage to initiate the private capital in doing that, then you are doing
What I want to achieve.
it's not about us.
Everyone's talking about
You mean,
public
what do you mean?
I think that would be the most.
Yeah,
Low increase of
low carbon competition. Mostly investment in the green infrastructure, the transport infrastructure.
but
I would say
it's
so.
Yeah, okay, I'm thinking from the side of energy.
Or is there
Yeah,
something like a,
It's
yes,
not
we
really
can
like
engineering,
it
so
is
we're
really
saying
more
one thing, we don't want to reduce energy, but reduce the. Yes, it sounds, I don't know exactly what it is, but it sounds like
Something like
for example, like mining people, it's kind of will, so it's maybe there is another major that can calculate.
No, but I see that
is
this is
generating
kind of like
Another
and jobs, like
Actually,
jobs.
there is.
When I think of the green like think about.
I would say so environment to be very important.
There is sustainable development.
I mean, it doesn't matter that you get everyone the job and then you have like slacking at you. That doesn't really help us.
Our task is to find out what they are saying and not what we are thinking. Right? And they say they are in favor of their parents.
Yeah, sure.
So
we agree on that.
It's not tracking that we hope that you create
So let's maybe go through, I mean, with the government, it's become clear, but I would say my answer to the role of government would be more the democratization of every aspect, because then it's not just about more government, but also about
we like to have
you can have
I don't know, like I mentioned everything else.
we can have a referendum investment.
I would write something like economic policy.
Just thinking about what consultation of this with the green house, at least in the US, it's like unionized jobs, so at least given some more power. I don't really think that, okay, when we do it's like achieving labor position of face, something else, at least having more labor negotiation.
What I said before, that it is this narrative that is hiding.
We're not really, like this is true, it's like kind of like in between, I think, I don't know. So like we are not wanting the B2, but like the also.
Yeah, it's fascinating, so. Will be, so. Sure, it is like maybe gains to that, maybe we increase inequality, because there are some, reasons you can garnish with some countries, they don't have the words and
trying to have one less unequal exchange trade system. So, like, for example, like in really specific cases, lithium to develop electric buses that the US is going to develop. So, but the government, they have like respect for the communities where the population covers why whatever I have like a real like compensation to that. We are having some of the lithium that is in territory, but maybe we are.
But there is another
compensation giving that actually for there is a huge thing with the
that can have like a really small.
so that's something that I really do. So that's apart that anyone you can really have industrial policy like is building the region that is the windmills. Decisions can be made in all these different so they become more that kind of in the way that they participate in their own management of their own resources, of their own needs.
specific policy.
Then government.
I mean, Insanity is like a group of some, so maybe it could be the case that different the same policy, kind
So maybe how about like maybe next to less unequal trade and industrial policy?
Yeah.
I don't really know that much about this, but one of the important points is these are Western manufacturers, so the industrialization of the country, so you can build the government.
Governance.
So I know
I'm gonna move like one area is technological development, so maybe we can say something like, and also like resource more like environmental, it's still very techno-optimist, I would say, so maybe that's a big point.
What else? Environmental.
Scenario, ideal.
Like, I would give like a brush, like.
But I think that you have like a limit, because if you want to maintain so do you need like a kind of buffer?
Two more minutes, guys. You have to come to an end.
And if you are not eating that, you are. That is wrong. I mean, and if you don't have the, okay, things are okay, for example,
It's part of the resource. But yeah,
there's more than energy demand and supply. I would say
another box talk about we can talk about
my previous job, I was organizing lots of work. In my previous job, I was organizing a lot of workshops.
Natural fertilization, right? Natural fertilization.
I did take some pictures of the write a report and some schools. I did take some pictures. Was there a group picture taken? No. We should take a group picture. Yeah, for today's
Building more interconnection implementation of strict emissions regulation and stuff like that. So we use these green waste to grid and stuff like that.
Okay, 4 minutes are really over now. We don't expect you to develop a scenario in 15 minutes. It took us also much more time. Okay. A group, which group are you? Group 2. I think you're ready. Can you maybe give us a short presentation? I have some chewing gums. We can stick it on the wall if you want. And everyone can see the beautiful drawing of the watermelon. Yes. I do it. Just do the speaking. Who does the speaking?
Yes? No, I speak all the time. I can explain why the watermelon. It's a joke, like conservative politicians sometimes say, oh, they're just green on the outside but red on the inside, so they're hiding socialism behind the environment.
It's a very nice analogy, the watermelon.
So, in fact, some of the things that we were talking about is that this Green New Deal has been used by a variety of actors, like from the democratic, like the more like the leftist side of the Democratic Party in the US to the European Union who are using the concept, but we try to make something out of it that is kind of greater. So the thing is, one of the main things is that they are focusing more on the social problem than growth, and some of these people that use this narrative are pro-growth, others are more post-growth, and currently more in the post-growth area approaches maybe. And then one of the most important things that we found is the role of the state and the investment in the industrial policy, and also in building public infrastructure and services, and also related to jobs, to work, like on the focus on having a job guarantee and also the high quality jobs, which are also related to industrial policy. And so in this also area, we have the role of the unions, which might be important, and also in other fields, we have the optimism regarding tech, so it's huge investments in infrastructure, also kind of technological intensive, let's say, and investment in renewables. And then we have also the optimism also is regarding the environment and the resources. And maybe this part is a bit like less, I don't know how to say this, but it is more like, I don't know,
Less elaborate?
central.
Yeah, less elaborated, yeah.
Or something like the agriculture, which would be organic and people would be eating healthy food, and having big adaptation and have some energy reduction, like energy efficiency, and also some redistribution.
Thank you.
There was
I
something.
think they deserve an applause. Also very much in line with what we, I mean,
Yes.
Natasha is going to do a presentation,
Yes.
but we decided that our understanding of the Green Deal was that it's a growth path, so economic growth, which would be needed for financing all the additional social policies, because you said that there are different schools, and that's true.
Do you share the observation that this was true like 10 years ago, but in the last 5 years, no one who talks about a Green New Deal is seriously pro-growth anymore? And everyone has found another solution to the problem of financing?
Well, in the European Union, I wouldn't say so. So it's really a Green Deal with some extra social policies just to buffer. I mean, the European Union talks about the Green New Deal, and really the social part is a direct income contribution to households, to vulnerable households, to cushion the effect of energy transition. So it's basically, yeah, it's green growth with some, and this is also largely how we understand it, how we will model it. It doesn't mean that we are not aware that there are many different schools of thought, but also I think the ideas that come from the US in many ways, the US is starting from a much lower level in terms of social policies. So many of the things that they want to implement, or the left in the US are proposing, are things that we in Europe do already have. So that's why also ultimately we are leaning more towards the European Green New Deal, because the EU is our sponsor, so it makes a lot of sense to implement EU policies, especially for the world region, Europe, and then for the rest of the world. We want to upscale this idea of this direct income support for households, or this redistribution. But essentially, yeah. Anyway, I'm just going to, sorry, is going to explain this later.
Yes.
Next group.
Next group.
So, we were basically jealous about the watermelon that we grew up.
An orange for us, an orange.
Yeah. Means that we have enough space for the. I can also put it on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can start.
I'll go really quick.
Yeah.
But basically what growth, or the growth approach is based on, it's about bringing the economy back in balance to a living world. And how we want to do this? We want to absolutely like change the way that we measure progress. We don't want GDP anymore, measure GDP anymore. We want to go for other kind of index like Sustainable Development Index. We don't say that GDP is not there. We know it's there, but for measuring development of what we want to achieve, it's not about enhancing consumption or enhancing GDP. It's about sustainable development. How we want to achieve that? We want to achieve that about thinking about the planned production of energy and resource consumption in the way that we need to maintain the two outputs stable, so we can become a steady state economy. That's how we want to live with the economy in the living world. We talk about what it would be the relation between the global north and global south, and anti-colonialism politics of the growth and post-growth. We also talk about how we want to govern ourselves, about the polycentric governance or the governance of the commons as a political strategy. for achieving the growth. We also talk about how all these measures will affect what we also want to do in order to balance these two worlds. It's to reduce and reduce and reduce the environmental footprint. But all these, we want to do it also maintaining the quality and human well-being. And at the end, we talk a little bit about how we want to, that the growth is not about not developing anymore, or not investing in technology, or not doing research. It's about responsible tech development. It's about all these parts that's here, but the main goal is to achieve this balance between economy and the living world, always maintaining the quality and human well-being. Thank you. You try to do the growth, post-growth, the growth scenario in the William Morgan?
Yeah, we will. Yeah, we will. Yeah, we will.
And how is it going so far?
Yeah, it's very tricky because, as you said, a lot of the things are very difficult to implement in a model, like this kind of very community-based ideas of deep growth, etc. Because there are different approaches. One is a more, that a central government implements degrowth policies and does redistribution. The other idea is more of a bottom-up movement, where people voluntarily downscale and live a more simple life, but simple as with a positive connotation. So we will have something more in the middle, more of the kind of this government implemented type of. Because it's more easy to implement.
But often most difficult about trying to make a scenario of the growth is to find data, empirical data on the policies. Because the model you need to actually, this is how I think about it, tell me if I'm wrong. But when you are doing the scenarios and you want to put the data in the model, you actually need this data. And you need the data in the way that it is compatible with the model, right? If you have a sectoral disaggregation, then you need the data of disaggregation. If you are doing one strategy or the other, you need this data. And I found really hard to find the accurate data of all of these.
As you become more progressive in the type of model you do, the more challenging it gets for that reason. Because I know these are kind of qualitative terms, aren't they? Qualitative, equality, responsible. How do you parameterize that? How do you get the data? That becomes what we were saying yesterday about modeling society generally.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a very creative work. Creative work. You have to design something that in most of the terms haven't happens before. So we have to design something more or less new.
There is a lot of theory, but there is less empirical.
Yeah, and we had more discussions about is it actually feasible to implement post-growth in a model that has a traditional economic structure in place? So is the structure fit to implement such or to produce such a scenario? We don't really know yet. We'll see.
Yeah, that goes back to
explain more about the policies that we will implement.
I have like a little question not really related, but somehow related on one thing that you just said about the economic structure of the model. Is the model having some kind of accountability of like care work and general, like all the time that it's spent in reproductive work? Or
I don't know.
Sorry, in what?
In care work, in reproductive work, in all the tasks that are unpaid and done in society.
NGO work is implemented.
Only what is done by the government or the unofficial.
Because I think that it's really related to post-growth and program.
Yes, it's very interesting.
And there has been some, at least in Spain, there has been some approach to have a quantification of all the unpaid care work in society. That's currently, in fact, about 50% of time. So that's something that you can also try to move working time between different sectors.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm not an economist and I don't know the economic model in full. But Manuel, but I think there is something like an NGO sector. Is there like a non-cooperative work is included?
What is included is what we have in the national account. So it's part of the national account will be part of the economic model, but
if not,
I don't know if it's kind of included, to be honest.
No, it's very difficult to implement such a scenario.
unpaid reproductive care work. Like the majority of work that is actually being done on the planet, and it's not part of the national economy.
There is a sector which is close very much household production.
No.
I don't know what is it with
This is
the.
not, this is not.
They are part of the national accounts because they demand products. So they are included, but I don't know if the production side, if they play a role or not. I don't know. I should take it.
This comes back to your question earlier about is there some sort of bias in the way that, that there is political bias, and I think there's not intentionally, but because it fits into the way that modelling is done more generally, which is, neoclassical economics essentially. So there is, in some ways, there is a bias, and these are the laws of economics, aren't they? Which in some ways are laws, but there's theories and biases behind those. When you think about how it translates, and it doesn't really translate to this one, does it? So that is inherent in the model focus.
Then a question raised up is what comes first, the vision or the model? What do we need to do first? That we want a model that represents the reality, or first we have a vision and then we use a model to get there?
I think we might discover that we'll need a new model for this. It could be an outcome of the project. We don't really know yet. But actually, there was also the idea of, no, it's always, as always, you have to follow something because you have deadlines, etc., etc. But especially the idea of the structure. I mean, what kind of structure should such a model actually have? What kind of, how do you need to represent the economy to be able to model post-growth? And as your colleague said, when the care sector is very important, that's not represented. I mean, you pay out a basic income, but how do you capture what people are then working when they are not on a pay slip anymore? But we'll discover.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also depends on existing data, right? So.
Yeah, of course, it depends on the data. It's the problem. It's not included. So yeah. Great. I think we need to go to the last group, and then because in 10 minutes we'll have a coffee break, and I heard some of you are already leaving after the coffee break. So let us at least finish that part. Not that I have to finish.
You have an orange? You have like okay, so it's really
Sorry.
green growth, so this is like the main three scenarios advocated by the main institutions, the UN and so on. The EU too, like even though they are calling their new plan Green Deal, actually it's more a possible scenario. Green growth scenario. So green growth scenario is the techno-optimistic scenario, and basically consider that we just need to achieve the transitions by investing heavily on renewables energy and energy efficiency to decouple economic growth from the consumption of resources and energy. So that's basically it. And they don't consider that we have enough resources actually, but they just consider that it will be possible to continue to grow and control our resource and energy consumption by mostly energy efficiency measures and innovations. and market tools also like the carbon price and emission quotas. So for example, the EU emission quota market.
Great. Yeah, that is essentially also how we understood it.
Yes.
Basically, the idea in the green growth scenario is that you reduce inequality through this trickling down effect that that growth produces, basically trickles down to all households. Everyone benefits in the end.
You already started, I believe.
Yeah, sorry.
Everything summarized, and we're gonna go with keywords for each of the baseline and 3 policy scenarios. So, locomotion baseline would be SSP2, middle of the road, from the IPCC scenarios, which foresees fossil fuels will dominate in the future. We will have some inertia to change. Conflict of interest will arrive, and we'll have a strong climate impacts all around the world. Alternative storylines, or as we call them, policy actions along the green growth, which will be based on market tools and technological development. Actually, it will be based on the economic growth, absolute decoupling. We mentioned that it would be the overall goal driving this storyline. Also, we also understand global economic convergence under this storyline and fast diffusion of low carbon technologies all around the world. Sector coupling in the energy sector, we will talk a lot about integrated energy, smart energy systems, which will integrate electricity, heat, and transport sectors, and also with other like waste, like water sector. So we will see as much as possible sector coupling, and of course huge amount of efficiency improvements, which will help diminish the energy and resource consumption. A Green Deal, again, it will also have a kind of it would be, it is understood as implementation of green growth, but complemented with social policies. So in a way, it will also be attributed with all the dimensions mentioned under green growth, but it will also include a reduction in social inequality, much more public investments, ensure welfare state, public ownership of energy utilities. We will also have a very strong social policies expressed through job guarantees and strong public intervention. And the last but not least, post-growth story narrative, or somebody calls it like a voluntary downscaling, perceives no economic growth or degrowth through relocalization. It will be strongly based on sharing economy, self-organizations, commons, conviviality, voluntary behavioral changes, sufficiency concept, and reducing material torment. So, yeah, this is the way.
Coming back to the question of the shared socio-economic pathways,
Yes.
I was thinking now about the green growth, and you've chosen the baseline scenarios, and I can see that you've only indicated a part of the characteristics of the definition of the middle of the road scenario. I see that green growth would be maybe more like
SSP1?
SSP1 or
Right,
SSP5.
it's compatible with SSP1, but not exactly the same. And as Luis explained, we didn't map one-to-one with IPCC scenarios because we wanted to have some new features in our model, like exogenizing population growth, also GDP and everything. So we also, and in these SSPs, we have, in IPCC SSPs, we have a kind of GDP and population as an input to the model. And here in our story, we have endogenized these very important variables in order to be able to model these additional storylines.
Yes.
So it's not really one-to-one matching, but yes, it somehow reminds to SSP1, right? Yes, please.
Do you agree that the post-growth scenario should include all the Green Deal measures except the ones that are also in green growth? Like degrowth has talked about all the things that are in the Green Deal,
Yeah. Actually, we will talk about that later, because when I present the policies, I will ask you this question. What do you think, which policy should apply in which scenario? So, just there, after the coffee break, okay?
Yeah, and again, make it short, so all of them are focused on environmental goals, all three policy scenarios. But in green growth, the environmental goals are prioritized through market innovation. Here in Green Deal, through market innovation, but also we have some level of regulation and large public expenditures. In post-growth, the environmental goals will be pursued through transformation of the economy, regulation, production slowdown, and of course, behavioral changes. Socioeconomic goals, as far as they are concerned, we said that in green growth, we will assume that they are not, and they are not an objective per se, but trickle down. In Green Deal, we have some specific social economic policies included, and in post-growth, this socio-economic dimension is stronger, and we have universal social policies included in this storyline. This is another way how we try to explain, to articulate our storylines through identification of qualitative attributes. And here is an example for economic dimensions. We selected some dimensions of along each of the dimensions which we model in William. Here are examples of economic dimensions. We have as a qualitative attributes economic development, trade, economic inequality within the country, employment, and so on. I'm not going to read all of them. And also we try to associate some qualitative identifier for each of the three policy storylines, and also of course, they will differ for high-income countries and low-income countries. So, for example, for the economic development, for this attribute, in green growth, we assume in high-income countries slow economic development, but high economic development in low-income countries. While in post-growth or in high-income countries, we assume decline of economic development, and in low-income countries it will be with medium pace. We created this, we call them qualitative tables for each of the storylines, for each of the dimensions we are modeling under William. So we have a kind of, you see, around 10, so we have around 40-50 qualitative attributes which we use to define and to articulate all the features of the narratives which are used in locomotion. And the last thing for scenario, it was mentioned that we will consider 9 different regions and in order to find a kind of a combination of scenarios, it's not going to be that one policy action narrative is implemented globally. We also have to decide in which region what policy storyline will be implemented, and also when would it be earlier or later. Time also matters. So we have a kind of a regional diversification of the policy storylines from one side, but also temporal, because some of the regions will go into policy scenarios earlier than the others. So in order to prepare an input for our William model, we also have to determine which regions will go in which scenarios, policy scenarios, and when it will happen. So we created 4 groups of possible combinations, like global scenarios, EU-lit group of scenarios, regional differentiation scenarios, and unilateralism. We call them, but each of them will contain a number of combinations. And now I will show you the example for EU-lit group of scenarios. So there are three possible combinations we might consider as an input for our William model. It's EU leads the way when we assume that EU will grow a Green Deal and the rest of the world, all the rest of the regions will go green growth. And if you see this base green growth 2025, just to explain to you, we model the scenarios like this. If in the current state, we assume at the beginning we assume that all the regions are in baseline, and then as we modeled in some point of time, for example, year 2025, we assume that some of the region will go into policy scenario. So, for example, EU 27 with this base Green Deal 2025 means that it will start baseline SSP2, and in year 2025 it will go into Green Deal. So these are the notions. Also, out of these EU leads group scenarios, we might consider this EU as a pioneer, meaning that EU goal, we will assume that in the year 2025, EU will go post-growth, while the rest of the regions will go green growth. And the last one, EU steady state, we assume that EU in 2025 will go post-growth, while the rest of the regions will go Green Deal, all of them in the year 2025. Under unilateralism, this group of scenarios contains seven possible combinations. We call it phase down, not out, and it's in line with the results of the latest conference of parties, when India insisted on using the terminology down and not out of fossil fuels. So reflected that into our terminology, we will assume that from the year 2025, all the regions will go green growth without India and the rest of the world. This is phase down, not out. We also might consider America first combination, which means that America, we will assume that USA and Latin American countries will go green growth, but they will lag. They will do that not in the year 2025, but in the year 2040. So also this temporal dimension is taken into account. Rest of the world delay. So we will assume that all goes green growth, but rest of the world is not able to shift into policy action in 2005, but later in 2040. And now maybe these Russia rebels, given the new situation with the crisis, you go Green Deal, and Russia only shifts in the year 2050. This is another assumption for a combination which reflects a delay in action in Russia. So this is the way. This is a kind of a proposal we might consider, revisit, and also we will discuss with the stakeholders what kind of combinations will be appropriate for the regions, but also for the timing of action, which will help us when modeled in the William, which will help us to deliver robust recommendations for each of the storylines. That would be our goal, and I think that policymakers and all the other stakeholders would be here to help us in selection of possible. Of course, we cannot model all the combinations. There are many, not only with this regional dimension, but also with time. So we must select a relatively small group of scenarios which we're gonna model, combinations which we're gonna model, but we have to select very representative ones which will help us to deliver a good policy recommendation out of this exercise. With this, I'm finalizing the concluding part of scenarios. If you have burning questions, we can go on, or we can continue.
Well, we are a bit late
the
because the coffee
yeah.
break already supposed to start, but
Okay.
if there's like a really important question, please shoot.
It's a very important comment.
Yeah, but it's more a very important suggestion, maybe, because some of us
Yes.
need to leave after the coffee break, and will not be able to be here
Yeah.
for the next session. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but considering that the ultimate goal of the William model is to inform policies, I think that I have a lot of questions here in my computer that I want to ask. And I think that I would expect to deep dive into the political implication of the different scenarios, and also the technical specification, also how to build the scenarios, how to find the data. Well, I have a lot of questions. So I don't know if it would be possible, but I would suggest to have an additional session, online session maybe, with more part of the scenarios, because we actually have been talking about this. This is the only session that we have in scenarios.
Yes.
And I think it would be great. It's just a suggestion. I know that
Yes.
you have your timing, the project is the project, whatever, but I just wanted to bring that up in here just before I leave. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question was, I was wondering, because when you build a scenario of alternative policies, you are not taking like the paper that tells you this is the scenario, this is post-growth. You are just having a collection of a lot of things in order to have like which measures are like this. But in some sense, you are creating the scenario. I mean, the question is, how much liberty do you take, in the way of, I can disagree with this one, in the sense, like, is post-growth just voluntary simplicity, local communities, and so on. Is that going to achieve post-growth? Because I really disagree with that. I think that there is, you need a huge development of the national infrastructure, regular infrastructure, and so on. So you can say, okay, so these people said this in this paper, but I'm creating this scenario, and I'm saying that this is post-growth. This is my policy of post-growth. How much liberty do you take on that, or is just like this is what these people said?
I think what you need to understand is that it was actually on one slide. On the one hand, you have a model, and you want the model to be parsimonious. You want it to be clean and fairly simple and robust, and that can only be achieved if it doesn't have too many dimensions. And then on the other hand, you want to test policies, but not everything is possible because you don't have the degree of detail that is necessary to implement a certain policy. I mean, we have discussed this already with examples before, and that's always a compromise. It's always a compromise. And so what dictates what? I think that was also the question. Should you first have the vision and then build the model, or do you first build the model and then have the vision? I think it's, I mean, in this model at least, it was, first of all, it was not built from scratch, so there was also something there before. And secondly, of course, if you have very different storylines, if you want to compare, you need to have the same model, so it has to be also a compromise between the different storylines. And then when it comes to the actual technical implementation, you need a lot of creativity. And we can talk about this later. I don't know if you're going to stay, but how do you implement in a model a sharing economy, for example? Yeah. So, for example, our idea was, because you have to work with what you have. So our idea was that you introduce certain saturation in durables, for example, cars. If today we have on average, I don't know, 1.2 cars per household, then you assume that in a post-growth you would have just 0.5, but it's an assumption. Of course, it's not what you want to achieve, which is to see if the agents, the individuals, would actually behave in such a way. And that this is not something that this model cannot really deliver. I think it's you would need to have. I think there are other modeling technologies which maybe you can, on a small scale, make this kind of see how different agents behave in a certain setting. But with this model, you very often have to make certain assumptions and test other assumptions.
Okay, I would just about the suggestion from Martin, just to say that we don't know if it will be possible to organize a special session for this course, but what I am sure that we will have is just some seminar, open seminars, webinars. I mean, so it will be very, usually we will have some or several about this kind of scenarios. So if you don't mind, we will invite you. It will, as far as we will have all the emails, so we will invite you to the webinars, and probably we will have some webinars obviously about all these kind of scenarios and policies. So anyway, we will try to do this special session, but at least the webinars you will have.
Okay, so once again, thank you, Natasha and Natalie, for this since some of you are leaving, if you understood, just come to me and I will give you your certificate if you're leaving. And now during the coffee break, we'll just have a quick group photo in the yard. So the ones that are leaving, come to me, I will give you a certificate, and during the coffee break, we'll just have a group photo somewhere in the courtyard, okay?
And 11:15 we continue. 11:15 continue, right?
Sorry?
11:15.
11:20, we lost like 15 minutes, so.
Secondly, test all the models. You can do one by one. But
I need to plug it in.
还有一个上课照，上课。
他上车就了，他赶紧上车来，我来看车。看起来就是非常喜欢。这样因为配合我在认真的工作，他上学，他别的国家没有玩，而且他是国文版里面有2个有昨天晚上也有。下边有2个上课。我现在是还是要吃饭人的好，这样子我觉得打火也会叫给他。
How much time? Until 12:30, right? Yeah, yeah.
If there's any issue, just call me or send me something
So let's start with the second part of this unit, which is dedicated to policies. So up until now we've been talking about storylines and scenarios, but of course you need policies to implement these storylines. And in my presentation, I want to give you a little bit of an overview of how we have selected or identified, defined and selected policies which we want to implement our model. I also want to highlight that this is still work in progress. I mean, we have selected policies very much also based on feasibility, where we think we can implement, which we can implement, and we do already have ideas. But as I said, it's work in progress, so this is not maybe not the final list. But I want to explain a little bit the process. And yeah, I also want to stress once again that ultimately the selection, maybe you're going to be disappointed and here or there because some of the things that you maybe consider as important policies are not implemented. But really, it's there's always a kind of a negotiation, a bargaining between, on the one hand, the model structure, which I said should be fairly clean and simple and parsimonious. And then the policies which require, or the policy measures which require a great deal of detail. So how did we, tackle this task? Ideally, there should be a very consistent downward stream between your storylines. Your overall goals, which I explained before, should follow from the storyline, either because they are inherent in the storyline, or because there are additional ones which you identify. I mean, there are many sources, I mean, of general societal goals. You probably know the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. They contain a long list of societal goals. There is also the planetary boundary concept, which probably you know, which also include a lot of overall goals. I mean, you shouldn't exceed your planetary boundaries. It sounds quite obvious, but it's quite difficult to implement in the model, and we are not able to implement all the planetary boundaries, for example, with the current one. And then, so from the overall goals, you also need to implement or consider specific policy measures. And where do they come from? So they came from a number of sources. On the one hand, we made a huge review of policies that were proposed in the nationally determined contributions reports of the EU member states. So in the Paris Agreement framework, all the member states need to come up with, it's determined what the contribution of each country should be, and the European Commission requires that each member state comes up with a sort of a plan of how they want to reach that contribution, how they want to achieve it, and that these reports contain long lists of policies that that all of the European countries want to implement. So we reviewed those. And at the same time, we also carried out additional literature review to identify specifically policy proposals that fall under the 3 policy action storylines. And I want to highlight Oriane because she's here and she's done a huge job on scanning all the post-growth literature to identify policy proposals. I mean, post-growth is still a fairly theoretical concept, and there are many different schools of thought and policy proposals. So we tackled it from those two sides, and to come up with a selection, we tried to make a fairly objective selection, but ultimately, I mean, I guess the most important criteria is always feasibility. Can we do it or can we not? But we also considered other factors in this multi-criteria selection, such as the potential contribution to greenhouse gas reductions, or to the reduction of environmental degradation or social welfare. So here this is a bit of a repetition of what I said before. So we do have the planetary boundary framework, for example, from which we drew ideas from the Sustainable Development Goals. We took ideas, for example, goals such as universal access to healthcare, or just thinking of, for example, unemployment is also in our framework an overall goal. So we want to keep unemployment low. I mean, we don't want to produce a scenario which produces huge numbers of unemployment. So those kind of access to a job, etc. So those kind of ideas were drawn from these kind of frameworks. And here what I'm going to present is really the short list of policies that we want to implement. And you see there's a part which is white, because I wanted to ask you if when you see these policies, to which scenario would you assign them? So let's start with green growth. Which of these economic policies would you implement in a green growth scenario? And just shout.
CO2 prices?
Yeah, exactly. Any other? Well, this for us was a Green Deal policy because it's explicitly it's an explicit policy proposal of the Commission.
International trade policies that we don't know.
Yeah, that's it's a bit unspecific here. Yeah, with international trade policies, we actually mean trade barriers. Yeah, and then under Green Deal, which ones do you consider Green Deal policies?
In the European Union sense.
Yes, in the European Union sense, mainly.
Sharing economies?
Yeah, I mean, the EU also mentions the sharing economy in various documents, but I don't think there's a specific EEB policy. No, I don't think there's a specific European policy on sharing. I mean, there's the circular economy package, but yeah, I mean, the social climate fund is definitely, this is the core, the centerpiece of the European Green Deal. And so last one, post-growth, which ones would you consider, which ones do you consider as typical post-growth policy proposals or policies? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, anything else? Yeah, just shout.
They're all in some form, right?
Yeah.
It's just a completely different approach to carbon pricing,
Yeah.
and maybe not a social climate fund, but
some redistributive mechanism. So this is basically our understanding. So as you said, post-growth, not the carbon border adjustment tax, which is which we consider specifically a Green Deal policy, but and also not the climate fund, which is also a very specific EU thing. But apart from that, yeah, post-growth economic policies are. And most of them we want to implement under the post-growth scenario. Under the green growth, as you said, it's mainly the carbon pricing, and under the Green Deal, yeah, for example, access to basic or guaranteed access to basic and universal services, which includes education, healthcare. And this is also, of course, a concern of the Green Deal. yeah, and we've done this for all the modules of the model. I don't want to read it out, but just to give you an overview. So when I say policies for ensuring universal basic education, then that's not very specific, but it's for example, we will model this by increasing the share of government expenditures that goes into education, into the education sector. Yeah.
Can you go into some detail what policies for controlling fertility you're considering and what containing forced migration means?
Yeah, these are just ideas, and as I said, this is not. We are not sure it's feasible, but there is a difference, of course, between, on the one hand, introducing in the model a basic income, or introducing things like, you know, where you basically model the effect of something, simply assuming that it would take place, which is quite common in modeling. I mean, it's yeah. So it's a yeah. Sorry.
Maybe I can answer for the
yeah.
So the basis for controlling fertility, it was mostly like envelopes such as government, government access to research and education. Yeah, it's not like a very tiny policy. And it's quite the same for the computer and not
and it's, I mean, we don't have the detail in the model to really model the effect of education on, or so we have to make certain assumptions.
That is very difficult to know what is going to be the effect on some policy on education, just on good education. So that we can try to check is just a parameter, just to give an assumption about if you have a very good, let's say, education, you are going to get these results. And how? We don't know when. So we introduce just the effect, the possible effect. And this is something that you also can change. So if you are more pessimistic, you can say, no, this effect is too high. Reduce the effect. So this is what we really put in the model. There's a number to consider the possible effects of some policies.
Yeah, but this is where everything links back to the storyline, because in the storyline you say, I assume that societal preferences will change and there will be more environmental awareness, and people have different, they will value more free time over physical wealth, and you know, these are the assumptions that you make. Of course, you are testing these assumptions, and what you are testing is what effect would it have then on in the model, how would the model behave? But of course, do we know whether the education is sufficient to really bring about drop in fertility? No, we don't really know. And just to give you an overview, so we will also have transport policies in place where we assume both a modal shift and changes in car occupancy, or in transport technology. So we will assume a different or changed mix of propulsion systems, more electric cars versus fossil fuel powered vehicles, and so yeah.
Do you have different quantitative targets then for the scenarios?
Yes, we will, but they are yet up for definition. We haven't defined them yet. So as much as possible, we will try to take them from literature and from concrete proposals, but yeah, we will also just probably may have to make certain assumptions and say, okay, here it's 20%, there it's 50, or. But those are the parameters which also I guess the user can, in the tools that we develop, the user can quite easily change. So
some of them,
yeah.
In the graphical user interface, not all the parameters are included, but if you are, let's say, well-known user, you can go into the identified.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Ivan is not there. No, Ivan is in charge of this graphical user interface for common users, what parameters will be there. So we have selected the most, let's say, common, relevant.
Yes, and on the land use and water side, we'll have policies for the protection of agricultural land or natural land. So, well, with that I also mean that we will assume in a model that, for example, natural land cannot be transformed into build-up land or into agricultural land. Those kind of effects will be modeled on, yeah, afforestation, dietary changes will also be modeled. For example, the effect of a less animal protein rich diet versus. So this is really just to give you an overview. To finish this session, we'd also like to get you to work again a little bit, and I suggest that we stay in the same groups before. Do we still have enough people for 3 groups? I think we do. Yes, we have another exercise for you. And this time we would like you to think in terms of you. So you are modelers now, and you have to think in terms of loop diagrams or feedbacks, and consider what the consequences or feedbacks or trade-offs would be of certain policies if they were introduced globally. So think at least about what the effect would be on global energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, on global material consumption, on average life expectancy and health, and average GDP and global interpersonal inequality. I'm just reading it out. And I would also like to hear from you, so it's really a thought experiment, whether you conclude that it would be desirable to implement these policies, or what additional policies would be needed to mitigate certain trade-offs, and ensure that ultimately we achieve a sustainability both from the economic and socioeconomic environmental point of view. So I've again selected 3 topics. So the first group, group 1, you are going to work on a universal basic income, which is in our case financed through a wealth tax. So what would happen if every individual received unconditional universal basic income that is financed through a wealth tax? I'm not giving you more details, so of course everything depends on the extent of the wealth tax, and everything depends on how much the basic income is, but I leave it up to you to come up with a convincing story, or come up with a certain scenario. I would suggest that for group 1 that you consider that the basic income is large enough to allow everyone to satisfy basic needs. So it's large enough that you have enough food, water, clothing, and shelter, but not beyond that. So then group 2, I want you to work on the policy on personal carbon credits. What would happen if those were allocated to every adult individual? So you have a carbon budget as an individual, and you cannot go beyond it. Well, if you want to go beyond it, you have to buy it or trade it or whatever. What would happen? What would be the consequences on the dimensions that are listed before? So what would be the consequences on global health, on growth, on inequality, on energy consumption? And the last group is going to work on trade barriers. What would happen? What do you assume could happen in the model if we were to make global trade barriers more strict, so reduce global trade drastically? What would happen? What would be the effects on those dimensions? Maybe I should write the dimensions also on the blackboard, because I cannot show 2 slides at the same time. But yeah, we have paper, we have pens, and we have little time, so maximum 15 minutes this time, so no extension. You have to be quick. And it's, as I said, it's not about right or wrong. It's about you come up with something that you think is convincing, and you make your assumption, you explain to us what your thinking was. So you still remember the group you were in? Yeah. I know where you would see you. What the minutes? Sí, Sara.
Sí, yo digo, porque se ocupa con algo de sí, pero porque yo conozco de hecho de historias, pero de provincia, pero nunca ha sido como nada.
Sí, sí, has estado.
Sí, he estado.
The most important thing is the ground now.
I think you should.
But we are at the part for the third.
So 10 past, we need to close, so have enough time for a little discussion. Please read.
I don't understand.
I'm trying to understand each letter.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I mean, we mean globally. So just for to simplify, to keep it simple, we assume that everyone receives a universal basic income. Every Somalian, every every Swiss, every Spanish person.
What about tax avoidance?
Well, you make up your own story and explain.
You are creative. Right now,
No, but our group doesn't have. Oh, is it? I'm not sure how it is.
Yeah, we are free.
You're fine?
It would be nice if we have this.
Which topic? Which
and then with writing information, for example, and then we.
You can, the way you want to present it is up to you.
But we have to define, like, how we.
Well, it can also come up with other dimensions, but it's just to help you, like, for example, yeah, do you expect that energy consumption would go down if there were global trade barriers, or would it go up? I mean, it's a very complex question because it depends on the type of commodity also. I don't think that, you know, you can say, okay, I think in general it will go down, but for some commodities it will go up, maybe the energy will go up. Universal basic income. So So if everyone received a universal basic income, what would happen? Nothing, maybe nothing happens. People just continue working as it depends a bit on what the policies are. For example, I mean, let's just imagine someone who's currently living on $1 per day, all of a sudden having a universal basic income. What would happen? They would probably consume more, I guess. So the prices might go up, might consume. So you make this kind of hypothesis. Or you can say we believe in the global south, it will go up, and the north it will go down.
No, it's okay, not the question
just the example I had earlier, like for example, $1 per day, increase its consumption to the universal basic this will help they are universal basic
is that you have the access to water, so now we have more money responsibility.
Ahora estoy bastante satisfactorios. Sí, ahora estamos en porque nos hemos apañado bien y tuvimos trabajo en la universidad, prima por ser su marido y bueno, se separando. Su marido y ella se a la partida porque trabaja por la mañana, mañana por la tarde, sus niños están guardados
remain pero tardan un poco. Nosotros tenemos que su madre es francesa y su padre es español. Y bueno, ellos tienen ahora 20 y pico años. Y fueron, o sea, desde el principio, tardan un poco más en hablar también, luego mezclan los idiomas, pero, o sea, pero por seguro que si sigues así, a los 6 años, no, ahora viven en Francia. Ellos nacieron en España, estuvieron los 4 o 5 primeros años en España y después, claro, es totalmente diferente. Su madre siempre les hablaba francés, pero
pero claro, tienen otras personas que son francés, tiene que haber otras personas que son no hay algunas clases de alemán.
Es que son dos
I think you will have to mix
More to be, less working hours, more working hours.
Right now,
Claro, esa es una buena idea, porque cuando vaya al colegio va a estar en español y en casa
They are home, they stay at home, they get consumed more energy. The big problem is the survival of the
Bueno, one more minute.
Okay, but they don't have access to the technologies and the development that we have. We have developed
super fast and
But I mean, the theory of it is people stay at home, it's not like they're not working. Their working hours is still 8 hours a day. Let's say 5 hours a day, they're still working. So, but like. Yeah, because I know to me working hours is not just hours, it's like how busy people are every day on their jobs, and their jobs, although they are independent, but company is doing shipping and like factories, so those are not the way using factories, but that is still a lot of. Are those two separate things or just one thing?
Global interpersonal inequality.
if you apply these right setup Europe actually not have huge market.
Because I know this is a very common, especially it's coming from the wealth. So the wealth, which means it's supported by some people that get higher rates, and that can be a price.
I mean, there's all possibilities.
Yeah, but it still depends how because these barriers how they really what is actually
Actually, there are more people which demand
the most optimistic case would say the same.
Well, I there is a higher standard of safety.
Yeah, you would have a lot of
Maybe we can make an exception for this
Depends on which one.
Are you ready for a very quick last presentation?
I would say that.
So
Maybe we start with third group now.
Yes, please start. That's a good idea.
Yes. Who is ready to start? Okay, you can or no? Okay, then I can wait a second. We remove this or?
Okay, so let's have your attention for the last 15 minutes, then you're free to.
Okay, I can start. So we distinguish two cases of increasing trade barriers, which is trade barriers where parts of the world that now import a lot of industrial goods should no longer import that and then re-industrialize themselves, versus green deglobalization that is closer to a degrowth scenario, because we think the effects will be different. And also we said there should be an exception on basic foodstuffs and pharmaceuticals and stuff like that, because a lot of countries would be in big trouble if trade is no longer possible. As you can see, there would be a direct effect, of course. Less transport means less greenhouse gas emissions, and otherwise the effect on energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions depends partly on what scenario you take. So we were saying that energy consumption would decrease in both cases, either in a planned way or in a kind of disastrous way, because obviously you can't import fossil fuels anymore, but you could also not have the energy transition at the scale and speed that green growthers would like it, because you can't ship minerals and solar panels and stuff around the world. And obviously, if you decrease demand for energy in a planned, equitable way, then you could decrease greenhouse gas emissions. But we're also imagining a scenario where some countries shift back to domestic fossil resources, which might leave the overall emissions positive or unchanged. Similarly, with the effects on GDP and inequality, while generally the effect of GDP in the global north generally would be negative, in the global south, we were arguing that some countries could benefit from a deglobalization perspective in the long run, because they could pursue more independent industrial policies and so on, but obviously that's a very complex matter. Similarly with inequality, like if we leave other structures unchanged, but we import less energy, then that is exactly what's happening right now, right? So we're seeing a kind of recessionary inflation, which has all else equal undesirable effects on equality, whereas in a more degrowthish scenario, you could reduce demand equitably and deal with that. For materials, we didn't define anything, but generally, it's quite obvious will go down. Maybe there'll be similar dynamics to energy. And yeah, regarding average life expectancy and health, we only noted that it would be important to make this exception for goods that are especially important to preserve health.
I'm looking especially at the economists in our group. Paola, Simone, do you have anything to say? I think it was very well explained and developed. No. I mean, as I said, this is hypothetical. We haven't run, or we haven't yet. We don't have any model results, and all depends on the assumptions you say, as you make.
Yeah, I think one comment to this is that if you think about this in the near future, we also have to take into account that we maybe need to like globalize energy intensive industry in another scale. So maybe, for example, movements to some parts of the world where energy availability and PV availability is greater than, for example, Europe. And then we would like benefit from better efficiency of the energy infrastructure that we put in place. So often
Second group, please. Who wants to go next? Yes, you? Your group?
Yes, so we were discussing the personal carbon credit budgets, and we had quite a few disagreements on what it would actually look like, what the effects would actually be. But a few things that we hope we would achieve would be that, of course, we would have greater climate mitigation because less CO2 is emitted, and we would enhance behavioral changes that are beneficial to climate change mitigation, and probably reduce energy consumption. Also, hopefully, but that also depends on how it exactly be implemented, is that it could improve equality. And several questions arose that are quite important to what the actual effect will be. One of them is, will there be a price? Will it be possible to increase your personal carbon budget by buying additional carbon credits from other people's budgets? What would that look like? Would the prices just, stay the same? Would they increase? Would there be a tax on the trade of carbon credits? Yes, and also we had the task to more look at a national carbon budget, but also the question arose, who sets the total budget and how would it work if other countries also want to set this? So how do you fit the global carbon budget into all of this? And of course, there are questions of how would you actually implement it? So how would it work on a day-to-day basis? How would you track it? That was basically.
I like your observation about the equality because really it would need some extra policies. Otherwise, if it's tradable, then the rich would buy all the carbon credits and consume. Have all the rights to consume and travel, and so it would actually increase inequality. So I very much like from your presentation that you thought about some other measures that would need to be implemented to mitigate that side effect. In the last group, because we have just 5 minutes left. I take care of it.
So our group looks at the universal basic income. It's very hard to imagine that this is implemented globally, but we just assume that every country has their own wealth tax, and they have a different standards of universal basic income for their own country. So first we look at its impact on the global energy consumption. So at the first off, we think that universal basic income can increase the energy as well as the greenhouse gas emission, because people who used living under the standards now can increase their expenditure per life. But we also think, if we think at the society level, the implementation of universal basic income can reduce the average working hours of the society. And that can be an indicator or an implication of the slowing down of the economy. And then that can, although this is a positive impact, but less working hours will then have a less energy and greenhouse gas emission. We don't know which one has a bigger scale, but we think there is a complex impact here. And the second one is the global material consumption. Although it's something similar with the energy consumption, because people are having more demand. Those people who used to live under the living standards can now consume more materials. But we still question how large is this effect from this low-income group are, or the people with a higher income, they have a bigger contribution to the material consumption. But overall, we think the redistribution of wealth can increase the material consumption of the society. The next one is the average life expectancy in health. We think with a universal basic income, people will definitely have a higher average life expectancy because they have more wealth to offer their health expenditure for better life experience. And it is connected to inequality, because we think universal basic income, like I said, is a redistribution of the wealth from the higher income people to the lower income people. So the income gap of the society is going to reduce, and it's going to have also have a negative but a good impact on the average life expectancy. And the last one is the average GDP and global so the GDP, we think, just looking at some countries we have nowadays, some countries now they have a higher living standards, basic living standards than other countries. We think the countries that have a higher basic income usually have a higher GDP because their people are secured with a better living, something like that. And we think the GDP will then have a feedback on their energy and greenhouse gas emission. And that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Have you also we also assume in our model that if we increase or if we introduce a basic income, GDP will create, it will actually create additional growth, which would translate into higher energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions and material consumption. Have you also thought about kind of what other policies you would implement to offset that maybe undesired effect? For example, in a post-growth scenario, if you introduce a basic income and then you have actually more growth than less, how would you, have you thought about that? Or any ideas in the group, what would you do? What other policies could you?
Comment on total material consumption, of raw material consumption, for example, when we talk about also you can help with the energy gases.
Yeah.
It's in the maximum income or strongly progressive income taxes.
Yeah, but is this really going to do the trick? Because just imagine you are currently living on $1 per day, and then all of a sudden you have full income. I mean, you have so much to catch up with. Everything from, in terms of consumption.
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah.
On the respective capacities to consume and the levels.
Yeah, but do you actually have a choice when you're poor? to not consume. I mean, we actually have a choice to.
Oh, but there's always a level of
Yeah.
income cap that will do the trick.
Yeah.
So.
Certain consumer goods that are not necessary for basic survival, or food or housing, but that are energy intensive or like fuel intensive. So text, for example, the ownership of personal cars, text the ownership of too much electronic goods, or these kind of things that would also maybe help to finance the basic income, but reduce the consumption overall because you increase the prices for these products.
Yeah. Yeah, or the carbon tax, or something like that, yeah. But we just wanted to show you that very often policies have to come in. It's not enough to just implement one. You need to think about all the other policies that you need to come out to get the effect that you really want. Yes, well, I would like to thank you for your very active participation. We close this session now, and I'm handing back to Luis or to Tomislav. Yeah.
Well,
for a very
Natalie. Thank you, Natalie and Natasha. And now it's a bit an emotional moment since we've been spending quite a lot of time together in the last 10 or more days, and now we are actually closing our summer school. And the first thing that we would like to do is give you the certificates for completing this summer school. So I would ask Luis, as the coordinator of the LOCOMOTION project, to hand in the certificates of completion for the summer school. So, Luis, you can. It's like a very
easy for me. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this task.
Well,
before giving you the document, I would like to thank you very much for your participation. All professors in the course have been surprised of the high level of motivation, interest, and participation in the group of all the students. So really congratulations for this course. We are very happy to celebrate it. We have been talking about a second edition of the course, but we have been talking only, but that's an idea, because really it has been very grateful for us also. So you have already the page, so you can leave.
Yeah.
So that's all for my part, and now I can give you let's say, Christopher Olk.
Shall I play the LOCOMOTION song?
Euro 1. Thank you very much. My pronunciation is terrible. Viven 1. Bena of Bauer. Tomás Cabellos. Sara Pavesio. Kim Yu-Nin. Paola López. Orián Donantes. Ole Van Allen. Manuel Tomás. Lucas Fier. Lucas Head. Jim Ban. Guillermo Morlin, I think he was. For you.
We will give it to Simone. Okay.
Francisca Alcalde Luto. Have we forgot someone? No, I hope.
No, I hope not.
Okay, so.
So from my side, if you want, we have an evaluation still. Okay, so I really hope you liked the summer school, but still we would very much like to have your feedback, so we can do the next summer school even better. So it's anonymous, so you can be very honest, brutally honest, and tell us your thoughts on the summer school. It's your thoughts on the lectures, on some, let's say, bureaucratical stuff like accommodation, meals, etc. And the ratings are between 5 and 1, 5 being excellent, and 1 being very, very bad. Yeah, so it's fully anonymous. You can fill it in and just put the filled in evaluation reports here, and I will collect them later on. If you want, we can leave the room when you fill in the questionnaire. But yeah, it's actually quite important for us to see what things can be improved or. So, Luis, when they finish the questionnaire, we are done. But we still have lunch today, so at 1 we can go for lunch, and that's it. After lunch we continue with the project meeting here.
Así probablemente hoy.
Ay, no, eso no lo sabía, pero bueno, hay otros veganos.
Sí, por example, vale, porque sí que sabía que te gustaba.
No, eso no lo sabía.
No pasa nada.
Sí, había dicho a... Sí, no entiendo. Luego cuando me devuelves...
那你不应该很开心吗？啊，如果你一直觉得没有意思，我听的就是超看你直接上涨。
Did you all finish the field? Luca, we can finish the streaming to the YouTube. We can.
we know that all is not